today, I mean, this talk is on non-fungible tokens. I will go so far as to explain that non-fungible tokens are how you tokenize assets that you can't just put into a pile and pull another one up as equal to any other token in the pile. So when a token represents a piece of real estate is considered a non-fungible token, or a particular right or access that's individualized and not universal in some way. Equities are often considered fungible because any one of the shares in a pool of equities is the same. So put the definition out there for you at the start here. Now we have a distinguished panel today, and we'll go from one side to the other. You can decide which side is more distinguished than the other. Let's talk to Abi.
Hi, I'm Abi Dupal. Can you hear me? There you go. Okay. I'm Abi Dupal. I head some of the business development efforts at Pactum Inc. And I've been talking to quite a few people who are interested in non-fungible tokens, in general, applying them.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Sebastian Brocher. I have a company that helps non-technical founders go from idea to product and revenue. And in the last couple of years, I've had founders come to me and have some blockchain ideas, or are curious if blockchain can be a solution for X, and so that's how I got into the blockchain space. And I have a side project that's called CryptoArte. That's a non-fungible token, decentralized application, and also generative art blockchain project.
Hi, my name is Andy Beal. Andy Beal. I'm based in San Francisco. I'm Ernst & Young's West Coast blockchain lead. I've been with EY since February 2016. Prior to that, I practiced law for almost 4 years, and represented cryptocurrency exchanges, coin developers, wallets, all of what I would consider like the Generation 1 business models that were around back in 2013 and 2014.
Okay, so to start with, why don't we discuss the advantage of tokenizing something like real estate or particular rights or whatnot as a non-fungible token versus the way the world works today. I'll just open that up to anyone that wants to step up and talk about it.
You want to go?
Yeah, I'll go.
Okay. I will highlight 2 reasons. Hopefully these are not the 2. One of them's low-hanging fruit. Sorry about that. So I think the first reason, and just to preface my answer, EY's thesis is that anything that can be tokenized will be tokenized, and I'll unpack that thesis as we go. But I think the obvious reason is that it becomes extremely easy to transfer something when you can put it into a digital form that is standardized and that can be widely accepted around the world with a wallet. I'll use one really interesting example. Someone from Factum was up here presenting before, and he mentioned why would you want to organize sand, and he was talking about, I think he was talking about working with unstructured data. And so I wanted to highlight that because sand is one of the interesting use cases for tokenization, actually.
You're going to have to explain sand.
I will, yeah. So sand is the 3rd most consumed natural resource behind air and water. And it's the main ingredient in concrete. 70% of concrete sand, the rest is water. And the market for sand is largely unregulated, but countries like the United Arab Emirates and Singapore and China import hundreds of millions of tons of sand a year because you need it to build buildings, roads, bridges, infrastructure, etc. And those regions of the world consume more concrete than anybody else. And right now you need, and I'm sorry guys, this is a little bit of a tangent here. And you can't just use any kind of sand. You would think why would Dubai import sand? They're surrounded by sand. Well, you can't use desert sand for concrete. You need to use sand that is at the bottom of rivers or on beaches because of the way that the wind in the desert smooths the surface down. It's not good for concrete because it doesn't bind well. So anyway, these countries that are surrounded by sand have to import sand from places like Australia where it's very prevalent. And anyway, and there's a black market for sand. It's a very unregulated asset, and there's a giant black market in India in particular for sand, and there is no regulated financial market for this asset that is in high demand. And so I always mention sand as a really, really interesting thing to tokenize because it is seemingly a very boring asset, but when you tokenize it, the opportunity is quite significant. So anyway,
But is one shipment of sand truly different than the next shipment of sand?
well, so it's a great question. So sand in and of itself is not fungible, but I use that use case just to highlight the fact that it becomes very easy to transfer ownership of something that was very hard to transfer before. And then the second thing is that proving that ownership and enforcing that ownership, if it's represented with a token that's in a form that is widely adopted and on a public blockchain, proving that ownership is a lot easier. So it removes the need for things like title insurance. You mentioned real estate, Paul, in your intro. So I'll stop there.
So that makes a lot of sense. I love the sun idea. So just adding a couple things to those thoughts, I think the decentralization and disintermediation opportunity that tokenizing the asset brings is also very important, right? So in the example of art, I can now buy art directly from the previous owner or the artist, and I don't necessarily need to go through an auction house, and that makes the market a lot more efficient, obviously. But also enables art to have better provenance, which is the same thing Andy was talking about, like, hey, where did this sand come from, and what is the chain of custody when you think about it in terms of supply chain, right? So basically, non-fungible tokens can take it a little bit closer, a step closer in being able to track things through their life cycle and as they change hands and create that provenance or track of record that make that asset more valuable, because now we really have an immutable record on what happened, where did that asset come from, and then who owned it through time. In the case of art, that actually may make the art more valuable, but it also enables that decentralized mechanisms of buying and selling it as well.
Right, so I think you guys covered most of the stuff around tokenization. What I do want to say is, why are we in love with the idea of tokenization, whether it's fungible or non-fungible tokens? It is because tokenization represents standardization of processes and treatment of the asset, right? So I could have a building with a bunch of condos in Dubai built by Amazing Sand out there from Australia. But I have an apartment that has a ocean view and an apartment that doesn't. It's looking at something else, and they're valued differently. And you have, and Dubai is a haven for real estate investments or whatever. You have someone sitting in Australia, you have someone sitting in Europe. What a non-fungible representation does there is, yes, I know exactly which apartment I'm getting, but I know the legal aspects and the processes associated with either owning the asset or transferring the asset. The rules of engagement are laid out in a way everyone understands. And then, of course, you have the trust and immutability. Things do go wrong in real estate transactions, but you have this ability to recreate what happened and set things right. So.
Okay, so one of the interesting questions that comes up when you start talking about non-fungible tokens is you're issuing a token for a thing, okay? And it was mentioned that provenance, like who owned the artwork, or perhaps when it was shown in public, which galleries, which art shows, and having this history. This does imply data, and so what are the options today and the pros and cons of those options for creating fungible tokens? Now, there's some people in the crowd here from Factum that might want to jump up and yell and scream. And if you do, there is a mic over there, and we will make you an honorary panel member if you have an observation we're missing. Okay, so again, go back to what are our options, how do we implement them? And we'll make Abhi go first this time.
So when we're talking about a lot of these non-fungible assets, they have a lot of paperwork and data associated with that. And when we're just looking at how we tokenize something, it's essentially like creating a particular representation on a ledger, but there's no way to capture all the other back-end information or the back office information that's associated with that token. Great, I can transfer the token to you, but how do I solve the problem of transferring the documents associated with that? And you're essentially looking for either off-chain solutions to kind of, transfer that relationship that exists between the set of documents and that particular non-fungible token. So yes, at Factum, we've been, some of the enterprise layers that we built allow for that. And this is based on direct, customer feedback based on some of the use cases we've seen. So I think that's the important bridge between tying the token and the information and the documents associated with that.
I'll add a couple comments. So what's also interesting, I think, is that we get to choose what we put on-chain and what we put off-chain, right? Mm-hmm. So obviously, with Factum, it becomes a little easier to put more data and in a more reliable way. In other chains, putting all of this information on-chain may be actually cost prohibiting depending on the asset that we want to trade, right? So for instance, in my case, I implement the ERC 721 standard.
The 721?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And what's interesting is that from a technical perspective, the standard actually also states how you can actually associate metadata that's off-chain to that asset, right? So just wanted to add that there's some data that belongs definitely to the chain because it's what's adding the value on that data that's really truly important to make sure that's immutable and that is publicly accessible or accessible to the parties that have access to the chain. And then the rest, we can still have off-chain and have those kind of metadata mechanisms that, thanks to the standardization type things that you were mentioning, Abhi, make still everyone be able to access.
Okay, now are you very familiar with the ERC 20 and the 721?
Yeah,
okay.
Pretty much.
How many of you know what an ERC 20 token is? How many of you know what a 721 is? And how many of you could pass a test about what the differences are? 2, okay. If you're going to give us a cheat sheet, what's the difference between the ERC 20 and the 721, since most everyone in here knows? How many of you could tell me what's in the 721? I guess I should have asked, ERC 20. How many of you could tell me what's in the ERC 20 standard? Okay, so we're not that technical. All right, just a cheat sheet, if you can just give us a sentence or two. What does the ERC 20 do? And what does the ERC 721 do? And there you go.
All right. So trying to summarize it real quick, the ERC 20 internally just keeps track of how many tokens an owner has, right? So address 1 owns 20, address 2 owns 30. It doesn't keep track, obviously, because they're fungible on which tokens. There's no notion of which tokens. There's just a notion of a balance. And so the methods it exposes are things like balance of, and the balance of owner with address 1, maybe 20, and the balance of owner 2, maybe 30. And then it establishes ways to transfer tokens, right? Okay. Balances. And so when we transfer, the contract checks is like, hey, does he have enough money to pay for that transfer, yes or no, and then it does the atomic transaction from sender to receiver, right? On the 721 standard, internally, the contract keeps track of an indexed array of now address 1 owns token 1 and may own token 2 and may own token 19, right? So instead of having a balance of, we have an owner of who is the owner of token 0 or who is the owner of token 1, because now token 0 and token 1 may have completely different value and represent completely different assets. And so those are the main differences.
Under 721, can I have partial ownership of one of the indexed values?
Not per se. You can combine it with other standards, right?
But I can't have half of index 1.
Right, you cannot.
Now, here's another trivia question. How many ERC standards are there? Okay, anybody know how many standards there are? Somebody yesterday told me about an ERC 1440. Okay, so I don't know if that means that there's thousands of these standards or not, but the token standard inside of Ethereum is very interesting. And was that answer helpful to anybody? Did that enlighten you? Okay, I want to make sure I'm not going too deep because I love the technical stuff. Okay, so do you have something to add?
No, that was great.
Okay.
So one thing that you did bring up about, well, it came up was the fragmentation of the non-fungible token, right? So
Right.
I think what's interesting is the ability to do that opens up very interesting investment opportunities, say in the real estate sector, where, when Amazon was deciding, I guess it's still deciding where the next headquarters was going to be, right? I was talking about someone who works at an investment fund. One of the investment strategies would have been go to the top 5 cities you think they would end up in, buy some Class A property there, and then eventually, as the results come out, you can discard the other properties, right? And all you need is 20% of your portfolio to go up really, really quickly. But that is not possible in today's world, like at least not in a quick way. You can't just go to a terminal and do that. So what non-fungible tokens are likely to do is increase the velocity of these assets, which would traditionally have not been as mobile. So just wanted to mention that.
Okay. Fractional ownership is very interesting. You grabbed the mic, so you must have had an observation.
Well, you asked about having multiple owners, and there's a protocol out there called SET protocol. Has anybody heard of SET? S-E-T. It basically allows you to create fungible, non-fungible tokens. So you move your non-fungibles into a smart contract. They're locked up, and then you get a certain amount of ERC20 tokens back to represent that. So think about it like you're putting assets into a fund, and then you're getting equity ownership in that fund back. So the equity in that fund is obviously fungible. Each unit is identical, but the underlying assets in that pool can themselves be unique. So you can have units of account that represent ownership in a fund that itself holds non-fungible. So anyway, it's a way to create fungibleness out of non-fungible assets. Hope that wasn't too confusing.
Okay, it turns out, according to my friend Niall's watch, that we're actually in the question time. I'm afraid that my smartwatch ran out of battery. So, we're now at the question and answer time. So Niles, you can go ahead and ask your question if you'd like. I'm afraid that my good friends I put on the spot.
Yeah, no problem. Besides Ethereum, do you know some other platforms that could do non-fungible tokens really well?
Yeah.
Besides Ethereum, do you know some blockchain platforms that could do non-fungible tokens as well? Really good at it.
Yeah, so I've heard of EOS. Yeah, that's capable, and I think there's a couple implementations, but I'm not familiar with them.
I'm asking because Factum just released the FAT protocol, and that's a really nice protocol to do non-fungible tokens and fungible tokens. And we are working on decentralized identifiers as well, meaning the off-chain storage you were talking about would really be a nice addition to that.
Oh, excellent.
So,
Thank you.
yeah, the hint was the big sign behind you. Okay.
Sorry. That's why I'm Paul's friend.
Do you have anything else to add about FAT that you, maybe in reference to the 721 or?
I could add that FAT would be way cheaper than, for instance, the Ethereum one. But I guess I'm now marketing Factum more than I should have done.
Oh, well, you know, that's something we didn't ask, and so I appreciate you bringing up that question. What about the economics of tokens, and what does the token prices and transaction rates, how does that impact non-fungible tokens? I mean, I suspect if you're selling boats and it's a 20-cent transaction or it's a $20 transaction to sell the boat, you probably don't care, but it might impact other things.
Yeah, so I'll take a quick comment on that one. Yes, actually, so on the Ethereum network, I think like you said, when the assets that you're trading are highly valuable, then that's not a problem, right? But for assets that are less expensive, that can become a problem, especially when the gas prices go up, right? Because the amount of gas used is typically the same for the same type transactions, but when the network becomes congested and the gas prices go up, then the transaction fees can become a big portion of the transactions being done, and that can hinder adoption and transactions as well. People may tend to wait until the network is more available.
Ernst & Young have any comments about budgeting and?
No formal comments, but I think we're still in very much of a kind of collective maximalism phase for collectibles and other non-fungibles. People buy them largely for the same reason they buy other cryptocurrencies. And I think the fact that the gaming industry is adopting, some of this technology more and more will hopefully introduce some utility value to a lot of these assets, which hopefully equals a better price discovery mechanism, particularly if there are in-game markets where those things have, true utility and true user bases. Hopefully you're able to find some equilibrium there.
Other questions from the audience? Well, Zach, you raised your hand earlier. Do you have a question? Well, there is a microphone up here in front. Anybody that has a question, come up. And even if you don't have one, by the time you walked up to the mic, you probably think of one.
So given the nature as non-fungible, do you actually need a token? You could track a signature, a series of signatures on an exchange. I'm curious the reason for the token then in that case.
Do we do the factum question here? So I think that's a brilliant observation. My answer would be like, no, I don't think a token is necessary for all non-fungible assets, but there are some non-fungible assets that absolutely need a token, right? And again, it's just a standardization of that transfer of value. So how many of you are familiar with Seed Invest platform? Right, and if you've been following the news, Circle just bought them out, right? And they're one of the larger crowdfunding platforms. And right now they're doing everything on fiat. And the way I connect the dots is Circle is going to take the ICO model and apply that to that ecosystem, and it's a community of 200,000 investors. Where I'm going with this is today, the origination fee, the transaction fees out there is almost 9 to 10% of a raise, Okay, that's like ridiculous. That's like driving the cost of capital so high without even actually deploying the capital. But where the non-fungible tradable tokens come into place is, again, you standardize all those processes, and as a technology that is eventually going to usurp that ecosystem, we need that instant liquidity. Right now it's being simulated by these platforms and they're charging a hefty amount. But the tradable tokens that are associated with the non-fungible asset are the tool that will enable that.
Any other observations?
Some technical folks in the room may be able to check me on this one, but I think there's, for a lot of assets that are particularly dynamic, you need a lot of, maybe not a lot, but you need some data elements associated with them. And so I think, a token that has a little bit more flexibility to include some of those identity components and those attestation components may mean you need a token as opposed to just a pure signature. But again, some technical folks in the room may be able to check me on that.
No, I think that's right, but are you implying that digital identity is itself a non-fungible token? Were you going to say something about that? Go ahead.
I feel like there's a Factum product in the work that is a leading question.
No, it actually wasn't. It was actually the fact that you implied that identity creates attestations and is adding them to non-fungible tokens, and it implies that the identity itself was a non-fungible token. And by the way, that makes a really great argument for the non-fungible tokens, because if you're going to have provenance of artwork, how do you know it actually showed up in a show? How do you actually know it was sold from one person to another? Something has to give attestations of value if identity is one of those non-fungible tokens implemented even with 721.
Okay, is Factum working on something like this?
Oh, yeah.
Proofs or badges or?
Yeah, we're doing it more fundamentally, but
Okay.
But let's keep in mind, okay, and I'm going to level set here, and I'm sorry as a moderator I shouldn't, but Factum is a protocol that can potentially create non-fungible tokens, but the physics of the problem apply to any implementation ever. So no matter what we might be doing in Factum, I think it would be a great idea to create digital identity with E721, ERC27, whatever the number is, token. And I have not seen anybody talking about it, but when you said it, it sounded, wow, you could do that.
So there's two projects that are interesting that sort of, I think, show you what the roadmap might look like. So Wire introduced a KYC token that they will deposit into your wallet if you go through Wire's onboarding process. And it was meant to signal to decentralized exchanges that you're trading on, who are able to look in your wallet a MetaMask wallet, when you connect your MetaMask wallet to a decentralized exchange, they'll be able to see that Wire had placed a token in your wallet. Now there's no identifying information on that token. They just know that this particular wallet received a KYC token from Wire. So presumably they are, not on the OFAC list.
But
at a minimum.
You should be able to take the Wire issued token, go to Wire, and then they should tell you, yes, we gave it to him, and that's who he is.
Which is and it's an interesting. I don't know that Wire necessarily wants to sit in the middle and be responsible for fielding all those KYC requests from the industry, but it's an interesting proof of concept for how you can use a token in a wallet like MetaMask as a badge. And there's another project called Open Proofs that is very early. But they will provide badges to you for performing any number of activities. So you contribute to a crowdfunding campaign, that project will put a badge in your wallet. And it's an interesting signal to anyone who's looking that you have some association with this badge creator. So it may be that you passed a course and it's a credential, something like that. So
Let's grab
Yep.
the next question.
Yeah, so I got in a little late, and I'm sure you guys talked about like gaming being a huge area for this.
Oh, yeah, we already did, so
Yeah.
go sit down. No, I'm kidding, I'm kidding. Come on,
So,
come on, come
no,
on.
but did you actually mention any names of any people who are actually successfully doing this now? I know the problem with ERC 721 is you have all these transaction costs, and it gets in the way of the user experience. And if you want to buy, that funny hat in Pokemon or whatever, it's $3. It's the transaction fees kill you. I'm familiar with Wax built on EOS, which has no transaction fees. But do you know of anyone who's actually successfully using in-game blockchain technology to do this type of things?
Any games?
In-game.
Yeah,
So
like
so
people are
basically
using it right
the
now.
blockchain for World of Warcraft kind of activities, though I'm sure. No, don't go away, because you're our expert in in-game stuff, so.
That's scary.
So I don't have a lot of knowledge on games per se, but I do know that there's a few on the Ethereum network. But obviously, to the points of adoption is a problem. Obviously, I mean there's different projects that are working on that, and then also fees can also be a problem. Obviously, there's different ways to improve that. Obviously, on the Ethereum network specifically, they're working on scalability, and that in turn should solve eventually some of those problems. In terms of adoption, then those obviously need other type solutions, right? But
Go ahead.
I think we're making progress. It's getting better. We're just at the very start, right?
I think the panel would have a question back to you, at least the moderator does.
Yeah.
What do you think the benefit of having a blockchain in a game is?
You know what? If you're buying that crazy Pokemon hat, if you can prove that there's only 5 of them in the world, and you can do that through the blockchain, then all of a sudden that little silly hat becomes significantly more valuable. I mean, people have paid tens of thousands of dollars for guns
And swords.
Call of Duty, and some of these other games. And they have aftermarkets, but they're typically owned by the video game companies.
Mm-hmm.
They don't necessarily want anyone else to be able to resell their thing. So
Right.
they kind of like to keep that closed garden. But when you open it up to the world, then that's why I'm wondering if anyone has really done that yet. I
Okay,
haven't seen
well,
it, so.
the panel would like to call a guest panelist, Carol Van Cleef, to weigh in.
So I'm not going to go down the technical rabbit hole, but there is a project underway right now called Crypto Pets. And they have launched, and it is, I believe, an ERC 721, but I think they're working on another standard. It'll be ERC based, as far as I'm aware, but it's actually, the whole project is agnostic, so we'll have to have a conversation about Factum being integrated into it. But what they did is went out and commissioned with a gaming company to create a real game, and then the tokens, the crypto pet, can be used in game, but then will go in your wallet and can go to another game. And like World of Warcraft or others, you can improve the value of that crypto pet over time, and there will be eventually an exchange or an adoption center for the pets.
Well, before you run away, though, as I recall reading through various regulations, once upon a time, in-game and in-game only tokens were exempted from cryptocurrency regulations and whatnot. But now you're talking about crossing that boundary and muddying the line. Is there anything to be concerned?
I was going to save that for the 3 o'clock presentation.
Okay, so guys, to get that question answered, you need to listen to Carol at 3 o'clock.
No, but it's a very good question. I'm glad you are astute in asking it, because there is that question: at what point do non-fungible assets, where are they on that spectrum of currency versus something that may be more security-like?
Okay, so in case you didn't get that, if you are interested in this regulation and security applications, I guess that's a whole nother presentation at 3. We're actually right at the edge of when we have to quit. So one more. Okay, go ahead.
Just a quick question. What are your thoughts around composable tokens, which are ERC 998s, which are basically non-fungible tokens, ERC 721s, with standard ERC 20 tokens.
So how do they work as ERC 20? Is this just an addition to the 721 so you
Yeah.
can break them apart?
Yeah.
So
You
they're
can
not,
sell-
they're fungible within the non-fungible token, but non-fungible outside of the,
Yeah, so
Okay.
similar to CryptoKitties, right? So you can buy a CryptoKitty and they have these, it's on an ERC 721, but you can buy like hats for your CryptoKitties or scarves, which are ERC 20 tokens. So what are your thoughts around ERC 998s, which are kind of like...
Yeah, it's
okay,
it's-
okay, wait. I'm going to set a moderator rule. Okay, this is an excellent question, which means that you get to talk to everybody after the thing. You get 1 to 2 sentences only on that topic and 1 sentence to close any other observations you have. And start with Albie, go.
Okay, if there's a need for it, it's going to exist. So clearly there is. So.
So yeah, I think composables are great. It's a little early on the standard, but I think it's going to gain adoption, and it's all about standardization. At the end of the day, the standards allowed us to do more things and have more interoperability, right? So that, I think, is the key, right? Because I can do the same thing the composable can without using it, right? But
Yeah.
it's all about it.
So I think about composable as a bundle, and to me, bundles in a gaming context, which is really the only place we're seeing them, are a proof of concept for securitization. So think about like a mortgage-backed security and reconcile that with what you're seeing with bundles right now, and you'll see how decentralized finance starts to develop.
Okay, and as the moderator, I'm going to still break out of my role and say that when you start looking at very high-priced items, there is a desire to have fractional ownership, and your token that you're talking about addresses that issue. And I was, prior to your question, unaware of it. But I knew it existed. I just didn't know what the number was. And now I still don't know because I forgot. Guys, thank you very, very much for joining us and having patience with us. And look forward to non-fungible tokens to take a bigger and bigger share of the attention in the crypto space. Thank you.